Chapter 50. Annie. "Margot!" Atlas yelled, leaping from the swing and running around the corner of the porch towards the front of the house where the sound of the gunshot came. She was slower to react. The gunshot startled her. She had heard that sound plenty of times from her porch, but it was usually from a much further distance away. "Atlas, no!" she screamed after him. She leaped off the swing and chased him around the corner. When the front entry came into view, she saw a police cruiser 30 yards down the driveway. Chris was slowly walking around the front of the cruiser, his rifle in the ready position against his shoulder. He was pointing the rifle out into the dark pasture. She looked in the direction he was headed, but it was too dark to make anything out. She saw movement to her right, and when she turned her head back in that direction, Atlas was leaping down the stairs, running full speed at Chris, who was unaware of his approach. "Chris, stop!" she yelled at him before the realization hit that his hearing must still be impaired from the gunshot so close to him. Everything suddenly went into slow motion. Annie looked down at the deck as she ran across it. Her feet barely moved as she slowly made progress to the stairs leading down to the front yard. Looking back up in front of her, she watched as the two men, each one with a different objective in their mind, headed for a confrontation of some kind. Chris was walking into the darkness, the rifle still pressed against his shoulder, head moving to and from the sight as he moved closer to his prey. Atlas was past the sidewalk and setting his first steps on the gravel driveway as he adjusted his trajectory towards his prey. Annie was desperately trying to get either one of their attentions to try and stop something bad from happening, or even worse than what was already happened. She saw an image in her mind of an injured Margot laying on the ground, blood pooled around her. She was at the stairs leading down to the front yard. She took them two at a time, trying to desperately catch up. Atlas was gaining ground on Chris, who had slowed his pace. The gun was up against his cheek, still snug against his shoulder. He was creeping towards whatever caught his attention, the rifle in his hands, ready to finish the job he'd started. Atlas was 20 yards away from Chris and still sprinting in slow motion. Annie was taking her final steps in the gravel driveway before hitting the soft pasture grass that covered portions of the yard. Atlas was 10 yards from Chris. He lowered his body as he approached, ready to tackle him. Chris stopped and raised up, taking aim at what was in front of him. Annie was still running as fast as her legs would carry her, no match for the speed Atlas was running at. Atlas was less than 5 yards from Chris when he left his feet and leapt towards him. Annie held her breath in anticipation of the hit. Chris slowly took a step and turned his body to the right. The gun muzzle was now heading in the direction that Atlas was coming from. Boom! The gun thundered again. Atlas barreled into Chris, knocking them both to the ground, the rifle flying out of his hands and into the darkness. Chris was the first of them to get to his feet. Atlas was still on the ground, and he was holding his left shoulder as he got to his knees. She was closing in on them, only 15 yards away. Chris started moving towards Atlas, his hand reaching down to grab the gun in its holster on his hip. Atlas finally struggled to his feet and took a step towards his attacker. Chris had the gun out of its holster. He was bringing it up to bear on the man in front of him. Atlas, undeterred by the weapon being pointed at him, kept moving forward, his right hand still holding his left shoulder. Annie noticed that Atlas had red on his hand. She pushed that thought from her mind and stepped right in front of Atlas, blocking him from her brother-in-law's sights.